Hello, welcome to the Texas Bitcoin.
Off right now.
What?
Your mic's turned off.
Oh, so but can they hear me?
You can just flip it on. The switch is
Oh, I have to do this. Hello. Hello. Welcome to Texas Bitcoin Roundtable Part 2. Last time we talked about this idea of money as a form of reciprocal altruism, which is an idea in biology. And today we're going to continue exploring some of the ideas in Nick Szabo's paper, Shelling Out. And we're going to talk about the theory of collectibles and some ideas about the origin of money. So last time we talked about a kind of altruism called reciprocal altruism. And the idea of this form of cooperation is that when you can future interactions with the group or the individual that you're cooperating with. And the reason that you cooperate now is the fact that there'll be future benefits to cooperation later. And that's why you don't cheat to get the immediate benefit. But there's this other idea in biology called the handicap principle, which allows for cooperation when there isn't future interaction. And the idea is that if you can observe the other person's costs in some way, you can detect what is important to him. This can be stated with the idea that a meaningful message is a costly message. And if you're interacting with someone you don't know and you don't have ties with, but you know that he's doing something expensive, then you can conclude some things about him. This idea was used to explain all kinds of animal signals. Just think of like the peacock's tail, or deer antlers, or all kinds of these crazy things that animals have that look like handicaps. So the idea of something like the peacock's tail is that anyone can look at it and it's very easy to detect whether it's deranged or dirty. If it's perfectly arranged, you know that the peacock gets plenty of food and is a good forager and can evade attack. There's really no way that he could possibly maintain the tail without being good at the kind of skills that the peafowls actually need. And we can see these kinds of things all over the place in the animal kingdom. There are some animals that have sort of blobs of flesh on their face. They're called wattles on birds, and they're easy targets in a fight. So these are handicaps, and if you see a turkey with a perfectly good wattle, you know that he can beat other turkeys in fights. Because he can defend against an extreme vulnerability. So theoretically, the way that handicapping works is if you observe a cheating strategy is always a short-term strategy, and cooperation is always a long-term strategy. And if it was the other way around, then things would work out very differently, and you couldn't have cooperation at all. But if there is long-term benefits to cooperation, then you can use handicapping to detect the honest players. And so the way it works is a person willing to make an investment is almost certainly someone who has a long-term strategy in mind, someone with a low time preference, as we say in economics. And so if you can observe somebody making an investment, then you can conclude with some certainty that they're more likely to be honest than a cheater. And you can sort of raise or lower the level of the handicap in order to weed out as many cheaters as necessary. So the way that this idea, well, first let me talk about this idea called work functions. These are used in Bitcoin, and they were also proposed to be used in the digital collectibles, the reusable proof of work, Bitcoin, and B-money. But the original idea of hash cash was invented by Adam Back, and the idea was to guard against spam and DDoS attacks. Now, the problem with a distributed denial of service attack is your attack is coming from IP addresses all over the internet, because the attacker has taken over a bunch of zombie computers in order to attack you. So you can't protect against the DDoS attack by just blocking certain IP addresses. But if you can limit the number of requests by only paying attention to the ones that come with a required proof of work, which Adam Back called hash cash, in his particular system anyway, then you can limit the amount of computation that your server is going to do, and you can ignore the malicious attacks, because you can assume that a DDoS attacker will not have the resources to perform the required proof of work on all the requests that he wants to make. And another application of this was a spam safeguard. So if your computer is programmed to just delete any email that doesn't have the required proof of work attached to it, then you can ignore requests that are not that aren't important enough. And this is a very straightforward application of the handicap principle. Because someone who sends thousands and thousands of messages about herbal supplements or whatever to people, they're not going to care very much if one individual person doesn't read the message. But someone who's sending a message to you wants you to read it. And so we can use this proof of work to show that the message is meaningful. A spammer would have to do it thousands and thousands of times, whereas someone who's just sending one message to you would only have to do it once. And the way these proof of work usually works, at least in the systems that are deployed now, is you just have to invert a hash function partially. So you find an arbitrary number when it's attached to the message, and then when you hash the message, the resulting hash is less than a certain value. And the more you decrease the value, the more difficult it is to find an appropriate nonce. And that's the work that you have to do. So, well, back to the animal kingdom. So you can use handicaps to show different kinds of messages, right? So there's this distinction between intrasexual selection and intersexual selection. So intra, that means the same, right? Somebody tell me that's the right word. Intra means it's between the same, right? And inter is opposite. So in intersexual selection, what that means normally is that a male animal will have some sort of handicap attached to him that is selected because of female choice. So the females are going to be, they're going to want a signal that can prove that the male is well groomed and well fed and so on. So something that's sort of costly to grow and maintain. And we see this a lot in birds when the male bird is very beautiful, it has all kinds of iridescent colors, and the female is drab and boring. That's what's happening there. And then there's another idea called intrasexual selection. This usually means that the male is selected based on being able to win fights against other males. So handicaps for these kind of purposes usually come in the form of very ornate weapons on the male. So curly horns or crazy antlers, these sorts of things are good for detecting who is a good fighter, because it shows that they're strong and they can fight with a ridiculously ceremonial kind of weapon, right? So like a horn that's actually good for killing things is rather short and straight. One that's big and curvy is not very good for fighting, but it is good for measuring relative strengths. So, but the point here is that we can use different kinds of signals to show to provide different kinds of messages. We have one that shows that a male is a good fighter, and another one that shows that he's healthy and well groomed, right? So Nick Szabo's idea of the collectible is an application of this idea. And what he basically said, he didn't reference the handicap principle in his paper, but the economic theory that works with his idea is that if you want to provide a signal of that you're wealthy, you want to have something that provably has a lot of work tied up into it. So a lot of early forms of money were things like beads, and he gives the example of wampum, which was used in Eastern North America to basically clamshells that are then turned into beads. And if you are a hunter-gatherer and you don't have modern manufacturing methods, it's very difficult to construct these things because you have to do it one by one. So if you see somebody with a wampum necklace, you know that someone did an awful lot of work to construct it. Of course, when the Westerners came over and they were able to mass produce this stuff, they ruined it as a form of money. But as long as you don't have industrialization and mass production, these beads are a very good sign of wealth. And well, let me just make the point here that I'm not saying, when we're talking about peacocks and deer and other things, like this is all genes, right? It's instinct, and the animals all do the same contest because that's programmed into them. I'm not saying that this is the case with humans and that humans are automatically have an instinct to make beads or something, but humans are good at learning and engaging in contests is a good strategy. And of course, we know that having wealth has always been a status indicator in humans. So it's a good strategy if you have this contest that allows people to show off how wealthy they are. Now, once you have something like this kind of collectible, it's very easy for it to start being used as money, because if it is widely recognized as being an indicator of wealth, it will also have a wide demand. Even though it's not being used as a medium of exchange yet, there are lots of people that are going to want it, so it can very easily become a medium of exchange. And this is what seems to have happened with wampum. Well, I guess, there's one other idea that I want to talk about. There's an idea called competitive altruism, and it's also an application of the handicap principle that humans engage in a lot. And the idea of competitive altruism is that a population of another, but it's not the future receipt of favors that provides the benefit of the altruism. It's the status that comes from being the most altruistic. So the animal that can give the most away is seen as the one with the best skills, or who is the strongest, who can collect the most. The most altruistic animal gets the most status. So the way you can tell the difference between those is, as I mentioned last time, reciprocal altruism requires some means of punishing cheaters, but competitive altruism does not. It's sort of built in, like you can just be a moocher and it doesn't matter because you just don't get the status, and the people giving to you do. And your punishment is that then you don't get to mate later on, but you can sit around and be a moocher as long as you want. So if you observe groups of animals that are altruistic and they're not punishing cheaters, then you should take that as a sign of competitive altruism rather than reciprocal altruism. So this sounds kind of a lot like a lot of what governments do, because we know that government ministers who control a lot of wealth, especially the ones who give lots away, they get the highest status. And there isn't any reason for them to punish cheaters in these kinds of systems, because they benefit from having lots of moochers to give stuff to. So very roughly speaking, I think of the reciprocal altruism as that's like the free market economy, and competitive altruism, that's like the state. Except that doesn't really explain why there's war and all sorts of other things the state does, but it does explain wealth redistribution systems, I think. So now that's my introduction to the ideas of the collectibles and the handicap principle. So shall we move into discussion?
Hopefully we didn't ask all the questions before the video started.
Yeah.
So you were discussing with competitive altruism, pretty much the reason why we give to others is not just because, of what can come to us in a money form, but the payoff is really the status of that.
Sure, and well, there are whole cultures that have what are called gift economies, and their production is all based on giving gifts to other people, and the person who can give the most gifts becomes the chief. And you have to have lots of good connections in order to have lots of stuff that you can give away.
So is that really just a symbol of someone's wealth, when you're just giving and giving? It's really just to show how much you have. Just as like you were talking about earlier with the beads, it's more about showing off what you have.
Well, once again, I mean, this is all, we're talking about people in terms of behavior.
Right.
So, you know, I don't want to sort of devalue people who are who are philanthropists or something. But I just want to be able to talk about this kind of behavior in terms of cost and benefits and what makes it behavior that survives, why it's stable, you know?
Sure, yeah, absolutely, and you know, the reason why I'm asking this is I kind of just wonder how a group survives and how that really acts or goes into mooching and things like that. Like, would a person mooch basically or slack off pretty much because they feel alienated from the group already or isolated? I mean, why would someone?
Well, I mean, ethics change based on the social dynamics. So people have instinctive empathy and they have instincts for fairness and reciprocity, and that's because humans live in stable groups, and they have long-lasting friendships, and that's what they survive on. And of course, people can learn very different ethics based on the rules of their cultures too. But if these kinds of things stop being beneficial, if it was no longer worthwhile for people to live in big groups that have long-term friendships, then they would stop being ethical. Either they would learn it or they would lose the instincts for it. And, you know, there's a huge range of possible behaviors in people, and people have very different personalities. So in any group of people, there will always be some who are more prone to being moochers and not reciprocating than others. So it's really just the fact that there's a big variety of people anywhere you look.
Well, because since we were discussing biology and animalistic behaviors, and you know, pretty much how we're pretty similar to animals and sustainability. So when it comes to slacking off, is it really about cheating, or is it more about the lack of inclusion, like group cohesion or anything like that? Because it seems like it's more about isolation of the individual than, you know, just the individual saying, oh, I'm a type of person, so I'm gonna cheat the system.
Well, you know, I think that you're talking about how you might change an individual person's behavior, like how you might get them to be more invested in a group. But this really isn't about that. I mean, ultimately, I would say that the reason people are altruistic is because there are benefits to living in groups and having long-term relationships. But why one individual person behaves one way or another, and how you can incentivize him to change, that's not really what we deal with in economics or in evolutionary biology. So you would have to ask, you know, a psychologist about that.
Is it possible that there can be actions that can be explained both in terms of competitive and, what was the other type of altruism?
Reciprocal.
Reciprocal
Yeah, oh,
altruism.
that's a really good question, and because I should have said that. But in any group, you'll see it, you can have a range. So like a good example is, gorillas will groom one another, and of course they can't groom their own backs. So they need to reciprocate in order to be groomed properly. So that's definitely some form of reciprocal altruism there, but it's also been observed that the highest status gorillas do the most work grooming others. So that also looks like competitive altruism. These two systems can coexist in different degrees.
And it sounds like there can even be just even 100% overlap when you're looking at the same action.
Well, I mean, can you give an example? Like,
Well, like you said about the gorillas grooming.
so I would say that it's about where the benefit comes from, because there are two kinds of benefit. There's the status, and then there's the actual gift that is received. So which one is more important, and what is their relative importance? That's sort of the issue.
But conceivably, they could be equally valued.
Yes.
And that would be like a 50-50.
Oh, and when I said that competitive altruism is like the state, that is not the essential feature of the state is the system of coercion, the monopoly on coercion. So that isn't like saying that every system of competitive altruism is evil. But competitive altruism does explain a lot that happens within the state, I think. Ayn Rand would say that all competitive altruism is evil.
Nobody's perfect, right?
Yeah, right. Well, I don't have anything else.
We have one viewer watching via YouTube, but we don't have any way to get like questions from them because the Q&A app is not working.
Oh, that's too bad. Well, why don't we say a little bit about the Austrian theory of the origin of money and how Nick Szabo's ideas differ. So one thing that I want to talk about a little bit later when we talk about BitGold is how Nick Szabo got the economics wrong and consequently why BitGold isn't going to work. But I think that the shelling out paper is all good and it's perfectly compatible with Austrian ideas. So in Austrian economics, one thing that we say about the origin of money is that the good that becomes money must be demanded before it's used as a medium of exchange. And the important thing about this is that you can't create money by coercion because you can't force somebody to value something. Because value is a feeling, it's a motivation, whereas the only motivation that the state has is imprisonment and other kinds of physical punishments. But this theory has been interpreted as saying that the good that becomes money needs to have a productive use. This is a popular interpretation. This isn't what Mises would really have said, I think. And this is why people sometimes say that gold can work, but Bitcoin is never going to work. But actually, a perfectly valid reason for demanding a good is the idea that it might one day become money. So Bitcoin doesn't really have a productive use. Well, it doesn't at all, but you can still value it because it could become money someday. You can value it as an investment.
That may, go ahead.
I mean, that being said, a lot of people will try to get around that by there's the continual stream of arguments in the Bitcoin community trying to apologize for this intrinsic value thing, and they'll say, well, the intrinsic value is that it solves, say, like the Byzantine generals problem.
Yes.
That's like valuing it does not require valuing it as a currency.
But see, once again, that isn't an individual benefit. That isn't a reason for me to want to put my own time and resources into Bitcoin, you know? So that's, I mean, of course it's great to have a system that solves these kinds of problems in such an elegant way, but if I'm going to invest in it, there needs to be an individual benefit.
And of course, even to be able to use it to solve that problem for some purpose requires using it as a currency anyway. So even if you have this idea of like you have some piece of data that you would like to be secured.
So one idea about the original value of Bitcoin is that it behaved like a collectible early on, although I would say Bitcoin is not a collectible because there isn't a set amount of work in mining Bitcoins.
But it could behave the same way because of like why people value collectibles. Like the point of a collectible is that you're sending a signal of some kind. And so holding Bitcoins in 2009 is saying, oh, I'm on the bleeding edge of it's a status symbol.
Right.
So that could provide the initial demand.
Bitcoin definitely works as a collectible early on. The economics is kind of different once it starts becoming a medium of exchange. But early on, yeah, like if you're in one of the few people in the Bitcoin community, you have status if you have the most Bitcoins, even if they're not actually worth anything in the regular economy and they're not used as a medium of exchange. Like if you're interested in the idea, even if you don't think it's gonna go anywhere, you just think it's a cool technological thing, you're still gonna want to get Bitcoins, because I mean, what else are you going to do, you know?
And if you're trying to reconcile the, I guess the Szabo approach to money origin and the Austrian school, you don't have to explain the whole life cycle of money.
Yeah.
Because we already know what happens once something starts to become money. You just have to explain the initial start point. How does it bootstrap?
Right.
And so if the collectible explanation, it gives the initial value that the regression theorem requires, then it's solved.
So I wouldn't say that Nick Szabo argues that a collectible is the only thing that it can become money. It's just a very good it's just a very good starting point.
It's also what we've seen in history.
Yeah, it is empirically the case that early monies have the properties of collectibles very often.
I think he may have argued that himself, because he published a paper, what did the Austrians get wrong? What did they get right and what did they get wrong?
Well, I think this is specifically about Menger.
Yeah.
So Menger didn't have a very clear separation between theory and empiricism, which that's sort of a later development. So he talks about money originating out of barter, right? And he was probably really thinking about a barter system where people are trading produced goods directly, whereas Nick Szabo says in the blog post that the origin of money could just as easily have been seen in tribute and bride prices and all kinds of things that are not really like a barter system. But the Austrians would say that I mean, the modern ones would say that we need to look at what is essential to the process logically, and then we'll call that a barter system, even if it's really very different from what we might envision a barter system to be. And of course, debt also. So this book, Debt, argues that the origin of money is debt. I don't remember the name of the author, but if we're an Austrian economist, we just say, debt is just trading future goods for present goods. So that doesn't necessarily change anything. So I don't think that there is an incompatibility between Szabo's theory and Austrian economics. It's just that in Austrian economics, any good can become money if it has demand first and it satisfies the kinds of properties that make it good for saving in. Whereas Nick Szabo's theory is really about a specific way that money can come about.
So why did so many of the contemporary Austrian school economists get it wrong with Bitcoin at first?
Well, I mean, that is a good question. I mean, I can tell you what I was thinking. I remember when I first learned about Bitcoin in 2010, I sort of put it in my list of things to keep an eye on. I didn't know that you had to keep such a close eye on Bitcoin, because the next time I learned about it, it was like, hundreds of times more valuable, right? So this was, well, infinite number of times. I think this was after the pizza sale, though, so not infinite, but there wasn't an exchange, there wasn't daily price discovery. So I was like, what is this thing? Like, it doesn't really make any sense. Like, how could it attain value? I mean, why would anybody demand it, right? But then in 2011, when I got wind of Bitcoin again, I still didn't have an explanation for why people originally demanded it. I just said to myself, well, it has demand now, and it's being used as money, so whatever, like, somehow people started demanding it, and now I demand it. But yeah, so I think that I had a conversation on Facebook with, what's his name? Who's the head of the Mises Institute now? Salerno, with Joseph Salerno. So he said that he didn't think that Bitcoin would defeat gold in a real free market setting, which I think is ridiculous, because it obviously already is, I would say. And but he did correctly state that it's not the economist's job to explain why it was originally valued, but we know from the logic of the theory that it must have been demanded first and then used as a medium of exchange. And that's also what we observe. So I think that I think that there's sort of this popular interpretation of the regression theorem, which says that only something like gold is going to work. It has to be commodity money. But that isn't what the people who know what they're talking about believe. But there still is this sort of this perception that Bitcoin is a fad or something. So I guess I would really say that it's more of like an investment outlook than economics. It's really just a pro-gold ideology. But if you ask a good Austrian economist, even one who likes gold better, he's not going to tell you that it's impossible for Bitcoin to become money.
I'm remembering the Niels van der Linden, the guy.
77 cents.
Yeah,
Yes.
He was the guy who invented the voluntarist V.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
put out this video, "Don't buy Bitcoins," and it was all about explaining why the regression theorem dictates that Bitcoin cannot become money.
Right, yeah.
Therefore, you should never buy any.
So I think that any Austrian economist worth his salt would disagree with that statement.
Well, now we would, but
Yeah.
I guess the question is why were so few of them doing it in 2010 and 2011?
Yeah, well, I mean, Bitcoin is really pretty interdisciplinary. Like, there aren't very many people who would have both an interest in the economics and the distributed system software stuff to realize that it's a good idea. I mean, I remember, like, when I first started buying Bitcoin, I was just like, you can teleport this instantly anywhere, and it can't be confiscated physically, so that's pretty good. But I didn't really know about the cypherpunks and about the history at that point.
Well, I think, you know, with gold, at this point in society, we don't have to be chemists to understand why gold is able to fulfill the sorts of qualities that allow us to have good reciprocal altruism. Meanwhile, with, like you were saying, you need a sort of technical background to be able to, at this point, understand why Bitcoin would be able to fulfill these qualities.
Well, you know, I've never heard an Austrian economist talk a lot about wampum either, you know?
Yeah, at best you'll hear someone make reference to yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one.
But it's also kind of funny for economists to talk about gold and free markets.
Yeah.
The vast majority of the gold in the world is held by central banks,
Yeah.
which are government chartered monopolies and have nothing whatsoever to do with the free market.
Yeah.
So why would anyone talk about a gold standard as any kind of free market thing?
So I really think that it's just a conceptual problem where they're not used to dealing with anything but gold and fiat, and gold beats fiat. Therefore, I don't know what Bitcoin is, but
Gold beats
beats
fiat
it,
in
right.
certain ways.
Yeah, right. That's true too. Like, they both have their advantages.
Yeah, I've said this before, but you know, as we've gotten more into Bitcoin, we've sort of changed the way we even describe a lot of economics and political theory by talking more in terms of cryptography and sort of these economic and political issues being ones of information theory,
Sure.
information security.
Well, if you just think about this reciprocal altruism idea, the essential feature is the ability to punish cheaters. Even if there are no cheaters, you still need that ability. And that's cryptography. I mean, you're not doing it with a computer, and you're not doing it with one-way functions, but that's really the whole point. The whole point of cryptography is coming up with ways for people to interact so that they can provide guarantees to one another.
Right.
And that means both parties knowing that there will be repercussions for trying to break the protocol.
So maybe we need a less technical cryptography book for economists, where it describes it in terms of social phenomenon
Good
rather
idea.
than mathematics.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
that's
that's-
gonna get started on that.
Well, that's kind of what I was trying to
Yeah.
write.
Yeah.
And so hopefully that'll happen eventually.
Yeah, I think that's what's being built here,
Yeah.
because you're building out this case for why, you know, Bitcoin is able to fulfill these social
Yeah.
needs.
You know, to talk about cross-disciplinary, we're drawing from biology to
Oh,
explain a cryptographic money in a term.
Well, when we talk about Bitcoin, we'll talk about how the handicap principle applies in Bitcoin. Because I would say that it's not a collectible, except in early period. But it is about using proof of work to show that you are to show that you have clout in the network, and to sort of decide on a course of action and shut out the cacophony of voices that would result if you just had an anonymous distributed system where anybody could say anything, right? The difference with Bitcoin is that, you know, I said that you can sort of think of the handicap principle as saying that a meaningful message is a costly one, but it's kind of, with Bitcoin, it's kind of like, there isn't any particular message that you want to transmit. You just want to come to a consensus. So it's almost like the fact that there is a cost, that's what makes the message meaningful, which is usually the opposite.
I think there is a message. So the miner is putting out this block, and the message is, this is my best, my best good faith effort at what the network consensus will be.
Yeah.
So I'm not like just generating my own random history that's not valid and that's going to be rejected.
Yeah.
This is what I think. This is my my good faith claim about the state of the network.
Sure.
And the reason that we trust, if we have two competing claims, the reason and we have to pick between them, we choose the one that has sacrificed the most to produce it, because they have the most to lose by producing a fake.
Yeah.
And so yeah, the message is this is my best approximation of the network state right now.
I mean, that's a good point. I mean, it's really a message about something in the immediate future, which of course that isn't something that is objectively true until it happens. So
kind of like it's creating the truth as it's asserting what it thinks the truth is.
Yeah, it's very, very weird. Well, there are some, I mean, the whole, yeah, right. But there are some things like that where expectations create reality, and money is one of those things, because money is valuable today because we expect it to continue to be valuable tomorrow. But if suddenly everybody stopped expecting it to continue to be valuable, it would stop being valuable today.
And that's sort of built off truth from economic data in the past.
And that has to do, well, and it has to do with the fact that money is just a convention.
Yeah.
And conventions can change, but there's reason to stick to one once you have it. So,
although, like, yes, I think that's a good point. There's a common kind of trope among different types of people that takes the fact that money is just a convention and then tries to just, it's just like this fiction.
Yeah.
As if that so-called fiction isn't actually solving a real problem.
Yeah. Well, it's just like how we should be driving on either side of the road, whichever whim takes us for that afternoon, right? It's a fiction that the right side of the road is the correct side in America, right? It's the same kind of thing. It's theoretically possible that we could all switch sometime, but that's how things work now, at any rate.
It doesn't matter which side you pick. The only important side is that everybody agrees to a side.
Yes.
Do we want to wrap up for this week?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So
you should say what you're doing next week.
Next time we're going to talk about eCash, the earliest digital cash invented by David Chong. We're going to it doesn't have anything to do with what we've been talking about so far. It's sort of a different thread. This idea is going to merge with the money stuff later, because eCash is it's not a form of money. It's a money substitute. So the economics are very different.
I just want to verify something real quick. I want to make sure I have the correct recommended reading.
It's Eric Hughes. is that's the best one to read on this topic.
I may have the wrong link.
Which one?
It's the one, like, I don't remember what it's called, but it's like how eCash works or something.
So it would not be this one.
No, not that one, but why don't we can leave that one on there, because that's important.
There's one by Hal Finney called Detecting Double Spending.
Oh, that's the one that I was thinking, not Eric Hughes,
Okay.
okay, so
So
I made a mistake.
I'll get the correct link.
Yeah, so it's Detecting Double Spending by Hal Finney, and that's available on the Documentary Institute website.
Alright. Well, let's close for today.